So before we can have a discussion on security, I think it's helpful to get a sense of what the threat landscape is. For me personally, I like to go over two reports that are issued annually. The first one is Symantec's own Internet Security Threat Report. You can see the URL at the bottom of the page. Check it out. This is a report that's done annually in April. So the new report holding 2012 data is due any day now. The real learning that we can get from these reports is not only that we can see that the threats are increasing year after year, but some of the things that we can learn from this is by looking at years past. And what we can learn is the trends that are happening within the threat landscape. I think we all know that attacks are increasing. But what's unique, particularly about this slide here, we'll look at the fourth bullet point down, is over 403 million unique malware variants. And look at the increase versus the year before, 2010. So we're really seeing a huge uptick in the unique variants of the malware that's being sent out. Here's the other thing that I thought was very, very interesting, and of course Symantec is basing their report on information that they gather from the Semantic community. But this is a very interesting a slide here that shows the number of viruses detected opposed to other types of malware, such as backdoors or Trojans or things like that. While the threats continue to rise year after year, the percentage of those threats that make up viruses is actually getting less. So I'm not saying that there are fewer viruses every year. Of course, there are more viruses every year, but the viruses represent less of the total threats, the total number of threats that are out there. And this is what makes this interesting to me is that we can't rely any longer on traditional signature-based antivirus software. We have to have something that takes into account some of the other threats that are taking place. So we need something that looks at behavior, looks at heuristics, maybe takes into account some reputation-based analysis. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper, but this is a very, very interesting trend to me anyway, in that the virus part of the threats was actually representing less of the total threats. So one of the other reports that I like to read is what Verizon puts out every year. Again, this is a report that Verizon does also in April, so the new version of this report is also due out any day soon. And what's different about the Verizon report is that they do this in cooperation with a number of international crime organizations, or excuse me, crime-fighting organizations. I should clarify that. So as you can see from the slide here, there's teams from Australia, the Netherlands, Irish reporting. The Police Central E Crime Unit is part of the London Metropolitan Police, as well as the United States Secret Service. Now, for the 2013 report, again, that's due out any day, they've included the number of, or excuse me, expanded the number of participants in this study, and it now includes even more crime-fighting units from around the world. But they've also added some universities. Carnegie Mellon is one of them. And they've also added some other governmental agencies, particularly in the United States. It's the U.S. CERT, the Computer Emergency Responsive Team. I think that's what it means. Someone can check me on that. But that's run by the Department of Homeland Security. So every year that Verizon is working with these various crime units, they're expanding the number of participants, and that's significant. So let's take a look at some of the data that's coming out of this report. We'll take a look at who's behind the data breaches, and next we'll take a look at how the breaches occur. So what we're looking at here, the number in parentheses behind the stat is the change from the previous year. So what we're seeing here is no big surprise, right? The external outsiders, or the external agents, these are still the big guys. These are the guys that are doing most of the misdeeds, and organized crime makes up a big piece of that from the breaches of 2011. What's interesting in this is the bottom stat there, that data theft, not the total number of threats, but data theft, 58% is tied to activist groups. And what's interesting to me, again, looking at trends, what's interesting to me is that the motivation behind these breaches is changing somewhat. So while it's true that a lot of the data breaches are all about the money, and this is monetized, the FBI believes, well, not believes, the FBI knows that the total monetary value of data breaches exceeds, dollar-wise, the total amount of the illicit drug trade globally. So there's a lot of money involved, but now we're seeing these new players on the field, and that's the activist group. So it's an interesting thing. What you might expect to see with the rise in external attackers is that the proportion of insiders is declining, and that's down significantly, 13% from the year before. I guess that's kind of good news. It's good to know that we can trust the people that work with us. So on the next slide here is how breaches are occurring. So incidents that were using hacking and malware were both up considerably last year. I don't have last year's change number on here, but hacking is linked to more than anything else when it comes to compromised records. And again, this makes sense. These are the threat actions that are absolutely the favorite of the external agents. And as you can remember from the previous slide, they were behind most of the hacks, or most of the attacks. So a lot of the attacks, what they're doing is they're circumventing, or they're trying to get around the authentication by either combining stolen or guessed credentials, passwords, and they're using that to gain access, and then they're installing backdoors to maintain access. So again, interesting things that are going on here, but again, going back to the previous slide, we saw a drop in the internal agents, so we're seeing quite a few less from the bottom bullet point there, quite a few less attacks due to privilege misuse. One thing that is always in the back of my mind is social engineering, and we're seeing from the Verizon report here that's at about 7%. Social engineering is something that always interests me. I don't know why. So let's take a look at how these things, where there's some overlap in these attacks. And if we look at the last year's numbers as opposed to this year, more and more these attacks are based on opportunity, not because someone was targeted. Most victims fell prey to these attacks because they had an easily exploitable weakness, rather than someone said, I think I'm going to attack these guys. So they weren't pre-identified for an attack. So whether they're targeted or not, the great majority of these victims, the attacks can't be said that they were highly difficult. And to me, when I see these two stats together, to me, what I'm seeing is this is like a gang of thugs walking down the street and they're trying doorknobs. They're seeing what doors are, or they're trying car doors, like the door handles on cars. And if the door is open, they'll break in. If the window is cracked open, they'll break in. If not, they'll move on. So these are targets of opportunity and they're not difficult. So as security professionals, this should be a little bit of an embarrassing slide to us, particularly the middle four. It's easy to say with 2020 hindsight that the breaches were easily avoidable. And the nice part about this is, I suppose, is if they're easily avoidable, that translates to something that doesn't necessarily need to be expensive or doesn't necessarily need to be difficult. The other kind of embarrassing part of this is that the incidents were discovered by a third party, and that sometimes it took a long time to discover that the breaches actually occurred. So, well, there's usually some evidence that a breach happened, but people just aren't in tune to it. They're not looking at their log files. Most of these stats are worse from the year before. And of course, the bottom one, 94% of compromised data involves servers. That's not a secret. That's not a surprise. That's where we keep all the good stuff. But check out this quote. Also came from the same report. Endpoints are the targeted are targeted initially as the point of entry into an organization, and from there, once credentials are learned, whether it's guest or brute force or whatever, then attacks can mount to other endpoints or maybe even servers within the organization. And again, part of that is our fault. We tend to set up admin credentials, and they are uniform across the enterprise. Throughout the entire organization, all the local admins, they have the same password. It would be difficult to do otherwise. It would be a huge accounting headache to know which machines have different admin passwords. Unfortunately, we tend to not put too much emphasis on protecting the endpoint. We're putting a lot of our protection tools that are available to us on our servers, because these are the critical machines. These are the things that we can't afford to have breached. So we put all this, all the firewalls and all the protection in place because these are internet-facing machines, but we maybe don't have as much thought about what happens when attacks come from the inside. So, what can we do about that? Well, Semantic Endpoint Protection 12.1.2 is now the latest release. It's designed expressly for the endpoint. There are a number of technologies built into the SEP. That's short for Semantic Endpoint Protection. So it's more than just virus and spyware protection. There are a number of other technologies that are built into SEP. These aren't add-ons. They're not additional modules to be purchased or licensed separately. This is what's included in the package. This is right out of the box. So the first one, we'll go right down the list here, is the SONAR, the Semantic Online Network for Advanced Response. This uses the heuristics or the behavior-based approach to ferreting out zero-day attacks, things of that nature. The next one down is application and device control. I'm going to, if time permits, I'm going to give a brief demo on that in just a few minutes. We can, within SEP, control applications, control what they do, if they're allowed to run. We can control devices, and in the demo I'll do in a few minutes, I'll show you how we can block USB devices, but allow certain other USB devices to operate as though nothing's in the way. And I'll show it to you in just a minute. A host-based firewall, it's way better than the built-in Microsoft firewall. It looks more like a firewall, and you can get pretty granular in the rules. Intrusion protection is a local IPS, or again, right on the host. It's very valuable. I don't recommend that anyone ever turns that off. And the last thing, and this is really, really interesting, a really nice feature. This is called Semantic Insight. This is something that Symantec has been working on for a number of years. This was first started in the consumer end through the Norton antivirus. They had the Norton community, and they encouraged people that had Norton installed on their computers at home to submit to Symantec ratings of the files that they used on a daily basis. And so what has happened over the years is that Symantec has amassed this enormous database of files. And there's a reliability rating attached to each file, and it's based on a number of criteria. For example, how old is the file? What's the maturity of the file? Has it been around for a long time, or is it a relatively new file? How many people are using the file? Do we see a lot of this file out on the internet and in use in endpoints, people's machines around the world, or do we not? And there's more criteria than that, of course. So all the files, everything that Symantec knows about, is given a rating based on what they've learned. Now, recently they've rolled this out to be included in SEP. So now this, and it's called Semantic Insight. Now this technology is available through SEP, and this is the reputation component that I spoke of earlier, where it's no longer good enough just to have antivirus. We can't rely on that any longer. If you remember a few slides back, we saw that the percentage of attacks that are related to viruses is shrinking, where the percentage of attacks related to the intrusion prevention and other things like that would be the sonar, those are on the rise. So we've got to have this layered approach to our defenses. Just trying to move things around. So what we're looking at here is a VM. So I've got a small machine set up here, and I've got it protected with Symantec Endpoint Protection. And we're looking at the manager. I don't want to go all the way through the manager. It's not my intent to demo the software complete. What I want to do is I want to take the next 5 minutes or so, and I want to show you one particular thing. And back from the slides, if you remember, we were talking about application and device control, and that's what I want to show you right here. Application and device control is a policy within SEP, and I've created the policy, and it's deployed to the machine that we're on right now. I'll show you the policy in just a minute, but what I'm first going to do is I'm going to, and of course you can't see this, you'll have to take my word for it, I'm plugging in a USB device, and down here in the lower right hand corner you see it pops up and goes away very quickly, but it says an unapproved device has been connected to the machine. I'll come over here and I'll start a Windows Explorer, and I'll go to the computer, and you can see that we don't have anything for an external device like a USB drive. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to disconnect that. I'm unplugging it, and I'm plugging a different one in. This one is now an approved device, and the only thing that you'll see here is when the device connects, we'll see the device show up in the Explorer just like it always does, and we're free to look at these files and do whatever we want. Now, how that's controlled, let me show you very, very quickly. I know I'm running out of time. This is the application and device control. I'm going to jump down to device control, and you'll see that we have here blocked the USB. Let me see. No, I can't enlarge it. I want to enlarge it. So we have USB devices blocked, but then on the devices that are excluded from blocking, I have an approved device, and that lists by name, by actual device, which one is allowed. So What that means is from a broad view, from a very high level, I've said I want to disallow all USB devices. But that's a little draconian. That's a little too much, because our organization still has some use for USB drives. We share information. So now you can get in, and again, on a very granular level, you can find the exact device ID right down to the specific device, and you can say, this one's going to be allowed. So we block everything except this one. So for example, it's a scan disk, and it's a 4 gigabyte USB drive. Those are the only things that are going to be allowed on our system. And then that's the only thing that is. Let me show you the other piece to this, and that's application control. What we're seeing on the screen right now are rule sets that come with the product. These are predefined. The only one that's turned on is the one that says block access to auto run. And you may have seen that when I first plugged in the USB device. One of the first windows that pops up is said auto run's been blocked. So if there happens to be an auto run built into that USB device, it won't be allowed to run. So a use case scenario here, we have an outside agent, an external bad guy, and he wants to gain access to our system, and he gets a half a dozen of these cheap flash drives, puts malware on them, and then sprinkles them in the parking lot. And an employee picks one up, walks in the building, and says, gee, I wonder what's on here, and plugs it into their machine, and it kicks off and goes. So the auto run prevents that from automatically running. But the one that I did want to show you is this one right here that I've enabled, is the block application. And what I've done, I'll just bring that up real quickly. What I've done is I've put FTP, the executable that's included in, I don't know, every version of Windows since I think 3.1.1. It's ubiquitous. It's there. It's all the time. We don't think about it, but it is one of the most favorite tools that hackers and bad guys use to exfiltrate data out of the organization. And because I have that turned on, let me just show you. If I start my start menu down here and type FTP, but I actually have to be there. So I get this. This program is blocked by group policy, and in the bottom, again, the window doesn't stay up very long, but it says the process was blocked due to security reasons. This is not exactly correct. This is not blocked by group policy. This is actually being blocked by SEP, by this rule here. I can go in and I can delete that rule. Well, you know what? I won't do that. I'll just disable the rule from here. I'll have SEP update the policy. So it's downloading or contacting the manager, getting a new policy, and we'll just give it about 30 seconds or so. And then we'll try it again, and then we'll see that we'll actually be able to run FTP. Let's see if it's done yet. Nope, still being blocked. It just takes just a minute or so for the new policy to be retrieved from the manager, the SEP manager, and put in place on the endpoint. In this case, it's the same machine, but still this machine has got its own client software on it in addition to the management software. So let's see if we've given that enough time now. There we go. Now FTP runs. So this isn't something that was blocked by group policy as the window popped up. It was actually blocked by SEP, and it's really that easy. You just go in and edit the policy, and in this case, it was we just simply had to enable it. But you can see it's as easy as just calling out the executable by name. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you very much. My name is Will Vanderlinden. I'm very happy to have done this webcast for you. If you have any questions, you can email me directly. I thank everyone for attending.